Okay, the third presenter is Zach Dahl, and he is the Assistant Archivist for the Province of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, Third Order Regular of St. Francis of Penance. Jack hails from Cambria County in Pennsylvania, and he attended St. Francis University of Loretto, where he earned a degree in citizenship education that prepared him to teach high school. After 6 years of working in high schools, he moved to the Province of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus. This career move inspired him to earn a master's degree in library science from Clarion University. He worked for the Third Order Regular Province of the Most Sacred Heart since 2015. In 2021, Zach began working for the Province of the Immaculate Conception of the Third Order Regular, and I think just this month he began working at the Secular Franciscans and Our Lady of Poverty region of the Archives.
That's not occurred yet. I just got an email the other day. That will start in April.
Please don't tell anybody he's working there now. And Zach is going to present now.
Thank you to Dr. Kelly for the introduction. As he said, I am the Assistant Archivist for the Province of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus. Thanks. We are in Loretto, Pennsylvania, which is a small town in Cambria County. The Province of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus was founded in 1910. It's been primarily involved in educational ministry since the arrival of 6 Franciscan friars to Loretto in 1847. The Archives of the Sacred Heart Province has existed unofficially since 1938. Father Bonaventure Kiley, who was the archivist for us for a number of years, began the archives as a series of source books and date books in 1938. Now, he entered the order in 1935, so this is very early on in his ministry. He was only a brother when he began this. Father Bonaventure was named archivist officially in 1945. He was then archivist officially and unofficially up until about 1990 when he retired, and the archives was, in a sense, taken from him. And it was very, very difficult process. Father Bonaventure was very unwilling to give up the archives. He died in 1998. Since then, the archives has been run by the friars, mostly. Until 2015, when I began there in May of 2015, we started having the archives being run by a professional archivist. I'm the assistant. The archivist is the archivist at another institution. He's the archivist at a university out on the towards the western side of the state there, eastern side of the state rather. We currently have collections organized into 2 categories: record groups and manuscript groups. Record groups are institutional histories. For example, St. Francis University is one of our record groups. We also have record groups on the Franciscan University of Steubenville, which is another institution that our Franciscan order sponsors. The manuscript groups are people. For example, we have collections of friars and others who are connected with the town of Loretto and the religious community. Now, we have collections on Prince Gallitzin, the pioneer priest of the Alleghenies, who came to Loretto first in 1795 as a result of a sick call to a Mrs. Burgoon. He later returned in 1799 and remained there until his death in 1840. We also have collections on Charles Schwab, the famous steel magnate, whose summer estate is now where the Franciscans reside. And you can see the building there is the Archives building, which was the tractor barn in Schwab's day. So that building dates back to about 1916. We also have collections on Sister M. Fides Glass, who was a sister of charity. The initial work in the new Archives building began in May of 2015. A site survey was conducted by Lyricist. It was funded by a grant that the Franciscans applied for. Following the site survey, I began a container list. Now, this container list was only used to give us an idea of what we had in the collections. It's not really used too much now. But in July of 2015, the collections were organized into the record groups and manuscript groups. Record groups, as I said, being institutional histories, manuscript groups being people. I was given the responsibility of organizing the record groups. At first, this was quite the task, because I hadn't begun my archival training yet. I didn't begin my archival training until January of 2016. So at first this was kind of challenging. I can remember the India collection, which was only 6 boxes. We had missions in India. It was only 6 boxes. It was driving me nuts. Because it was only 6 boxes. It was driving me crazy. But it was my first one I ever did. So it was a little bit challenging. And now I've done collections that are 60 boxes. And it seems like a piece of cake. So thankfully my archival training has helped me in that task, and it's made it much more natural. I've briefly touched on the record group organization. Currently we have over 90 record groups. I think we have 93 to be exact. I had the opportunity to fully process 50 of these myself. I'd like to touch on some of the other work I had done for the Province of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus. In May 2016, I began interviewing friars. Father Alex Bombera was the last of the friars of the Old Main period. Old Main was the major building on campus at St. Francis University. It burned on the morning of October 30th, 1942. I was able to, with the help of another friar, able to get Father Alex to remember some of the things that he did in grabbing chalices, investments, and other important religious artifacts and saving them from the flames that day. So that was very interesting. Father Alex unfortunately passed to his eternal reward in November of 2017. So I was just able to get this little bit of information from him. When I first started these interviews, I kind of did my own questions. I eventually realized that I should probably have questions that was curated, already curated, and kind of give them to the interviewees beforehand. So I had been in touch with one of the friars who was able to give me a survey that was done years ago for the friars. And the survey was kind of my standard list of questions since then. Now, I'd also done thorough research on the friars and had been interspersing my own questions throughout an interview. But this survey questions provided me with a baseline of questions to ask. And interestingly enough, I really believe these questions could be modified or tweaked essentially in order to be used for other religious orders. Unfortunately, I do not have the questions with me today, but if the need arises where one of you want to begin interviewing members of your religious community, I can get the questions for you. We can work on tweaking them, revising them as needed. I also had the opportunity to label photographs. which has been a bit of a learning experience, but fortunately several of the friars have helped me do this. Because when I first started, I didn't know who these people were. So, thankfully, with the help of some of the friars, I can look at a photograph now and identify pretty much who it is, as long as they're in our cemetery. If they're former friars, it's a little bit harder to identify who the people are. My love of archival work has also afforded me the ability to digitize AV content through the use of various different pieces of equipment, such as a slide scanner and a taped MP3 converter. I'd now like to incorporate some of our themes into my presentation. You may be wondering who the TO Archives is accessible to now. Currently, we're accessible to friars and researchers on-site only. We are hopeful to maintain a digital presence in the future. We don't have one right now, which I think is one of our downfalls. We need a digital presence. It would give researchers and friars an idea of what we had. Help draw them through the door, which I think is another thing we're kind of lacking on, is getting people in through the door. Some of the things I think we've done well. I think our interviews have been a great asset to us. I've interviewed 30-some people myself in 6 years. So I think those interviews have been a great asset to us again. First of all, half dozen of those guys are in their cemetery. So that really helps keep the memories and the oral history and those events alive, because those guys are no longer with us. I also think that our finding aids, which are done on SAA standards, I think those are great. I brought a couple of them with me here on certain things. I think that's another thing we've done well. I'd like to thank our Econome office, which has been really helpful, in our provincials as well, because if we need archival materials of any sort, all we have to do is ask them, and they can get it for us. So we have $60,000 HVAC system in our facility. Any kind of archival materials we need, paper, folders, boxes, we just have to ask them and they can get it for us. So that's another couple of good things we're working on here. The Catholic Archive Society. Now, it's a British organization, but I wanted something specifically Catholic when we talk about recommendations or things of that nature. I wanted something specifically Catholic to refer to, so this is why I chose the Catholic Archive Society. It has the following reasons for access. The Church is a society on religious duty to allow access to its archives, as explained in the Pontifical Commission's document, The Pastoral Function of Church Archives. It will reinforce the inherent value and relevance of the Church to society and allow for a better understanding of the work of the Church. Archives can be evangelistic. They show God acting in the community, and for some people, asking about access to records will be their first contact with the Catholic Church. Church's leaders will value her archives more if their external relevance is more obvious. Copies of publications produced by researchers who have used the archives will generate a valuable library. The Church will keep ahead of the law and be in full compliance with the spirit, as well as the letter of the Freedom of Information legislation. I'd like to briefly touch on exposure and how the TO Archives has given exposure to collections. For the past few years, various articles were written for the province newsletter pertaining to the province history as well as to the collections themselves. Secondly, exposure has been accomplished through communication with other religious orders, through research requests, etc. I'd like to touch on two of these examples. First of all, we had a friar come to us with a question regarding Brother Peter McDermott, who was one of our 6 founders. Brother Peter disappeared. He's not mentioned on the 1850 census of Cambria County. At the time, in 1847 and 1850, the friars were part of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. So I reached out to Dennis for answers. Dennis could not verify the whereabouts of Brother Peter. He did provide copies of documents, such as the 1848 charter, which proved to be incredibly helpful. The other occasion of exposure pertaining to our summit I received from Kathy. She was in search of verification as to whether or not the friars in Loretto taught in the local public schools. I immediately brought out the 1976 Loretto Bicentennial History book and was able to verify that the friars did teach in the local public schools in Loretto, and that Brother Vincent Wellstead, one of our founders, was assigned to be the teacher. Could not find a definitive source of this information, however. Outreach is another one of our themes for the summit. TOR Archives has been very active in this in a number of ways. For example, we've given talks about the archives as well as tours to the friars who are members of the province. I took it upon myself to create a comprehensive timeline of the history of the province. I used every possible resource I could think of to construct it. It's currently about 12 pages long, and it goes from 1799, when Gallitzin came to Loretto to be the pastor in Loretto, to about 2001, when St. Francis College became St. Francis University. In hindsight, I really should have put on there 1788, with the founding of McGuire's Settlement, which would eventually become Loretto when Gallitzin arrived in 1799 to be pastor. As stated earlier, Gallitzin originally arrived to Loretto, what would be Loretto, in 1795 to attend to Mrs. Burgoon, who was sick. The timeline has been used in classes conducted by the novice master and province historian to teach the novices about the province history. The last 20 years, however, we have little bit of information. So it's been very difficult to piece together what exactly happened in the last 20 years. The information does not exist in our archives. I've noted the several articles that were published in our province newsletter. I've talked about that before. The newsletter is distributed to the friars of the province, as well as the province benefactors and the local community. Catholic Archives Society has suggested several tools for outreach. They include heritage rooms, which we have in the basement of Alvernia Hall on Mount Assisi. Dave Hurst, who is a local journalist in our area, he helped out with the panels in the heritage room. He also wrote our history of our province. Temporary exhibitions is another outreach tool. Unfortunately, we don't have them in our archives. We have items on display. They're not a rotating display, however, and there's no outreach or anything as to what we have on display. They're just there. So you kind of have to, unfortunately, you have to come into the archive to see what we have on display. Again, a digital presence would make this much easier. Some type of outreach would make this easier. We should have temporary exhibitions and rotating displays. We do have temporary exhibitions in regards to when a friar dies. We do a memorial board. But at this point, that's the extent of our temporary exhibitions. Websites and social media, we do not have. And as I expressed before, we need them. It would be a great help to not only the friars, but the outside researchers. The last theme of the summit is preservation. Just so happens to be my favorite part of archival work. You may be wondering what preservation measures have been taken by the TR archives. First of all, I'd like to point out preservation in this sense refers solely to digital preservation. Digital preservation began for the TR archives fairly early with the digitization of audio cassettes via tape to MP3 converter. The majority of these cassettes were successfully digitized. However, one in particular, which was the seventh tape of Father Raphael Frizzelli's talk on the history of the Third Order, did not survive digitization. The majority of the cassettes that were digitized were oral history interviews, namely the history interviews that Dave Hurst had done in about 2003. These interviews were transcribed, and I also transcribed the other, about 60 other interviews that we have in our archives. I've already specified I conducted 30 interviews myself. So I've not only conducted those interviews, I transcribed them, as well as the rest of the interviews we've done. We have a pretty extensive library of oral history interviews, which are all transcribed now. Other tapes were talks that were given on Franciscanism and the new TR role, particularly at maybe a province gathering or a province retreat. Those have also been digitized and transcribed. Videotapes have been primarily shelved. However, we do have a few that were digitized using a video converter. It's hopeful in the future that more tapes will be digitized following completion of the organization of archival collections. Digitization of photographs has been ongoing. For the last year, I've been tasked with digitizing every photograph in our manuscript groups, which currently number over 300. This has been accomplished through the use of a flatbed scanner that was purchased by the province. Photographs have been digitized in 300 dpi. Foreign digital materials have also been preserved. Videos from YouTube or Facebook. You may know it's not the best idea to place videos solely on YouTube or Facebook because they could get lost. The materials could disappear. So it is recommended you have a backup copy of these materials in order to provide easy access to staff and patrons. We have digital backups for all our materials. Unfortunately, it's just on site. We do not have an off-site backup, which again, I think we need. We don't have a digital presence, which again, I think we need, but just my opinion, and I'm only the assistant archivist, so I don't know. They might listen to me, they might not, who knows. The Preservation Management Handbook, which I had in college, contains information on preserving. Yep, there it is. Preservation Management Handbook contains information on preserving numerous types of materials and information, including digital storage media and digital files. For example, the book recommends digital storage media be laid flat and to be boxed to be protected from dust and to provide cushioning in case of a drop. Lastly, it recommends that the USB connectors be covered. See down there, I put the source of the information, Preservation Management Handbook, which I have at home. You can find it on Amazon very easily. The book also recommends procedures for the preservation of digital files, such as migration, having multiple and independent copies. By independent copies, I mean copies that are separated from one another. One copy might be stored one place, another copy will be stored another place. They want to also have copies that have been frequently audited. I don't really have a conclusion, but I wanted to give some additional resources here, which I think might be helpful. The SAA guidelines to access on research material in archives and special collections, SAA guidelines on primary source literacy, and the guidelines on preservation of digital audio objects. The links are right there. You can go to the Archives website and take a look at those documents if you wish. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.